Tikilluaritsi, Sara Olsvigimi ataqarpunga Inuit issittormiusiunnersuusoqatigifianni siulittaasuuvunga. My name is Sara Olsvig. I'm the chair of the Inuit Circumpolar Council. Inuit Circumpolar Council is the indigenous peoples organization that represents Inuit across Inuit-led Inuit homeland. We live in Greenland, Canada, Alaska, and Chukotka, Russia. And our organization was founded in 1977, and we have throughout the years worked on many issues related to nature, environment, climate change, and of course the human rights of indigenous peoples and the rights of our people across Inuit-led. I'm very honored to moderate today and look forward to a good panel, and not least also opening remarks from Minister Lund from the government of Greenland. And welcome. And thank you also to WWF Arctic program for inviting us to your pavilion and inviting us to co-host this event. We will have opening remarks from Minister Lund, and then we will have 4 panelists giving remarks as well, followed by a dialogue. But I wanted to just take the opportunity to give you a little bit of insight to why being at the COP28 and climate conferences is so important for us Inuit. As you know, indigenous peoples of the world, we make up only less than 5% of the world's population. And still we are safeguarding 80% of the world's biodiversity. We see the Arctic is warming 4 times faster than the rest of the globe. The temperature has already risen 2.2 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial temperatures in our region. And as I have said before at this COP, these are not just numbers on paper for us. These are the reality, the direct impact of the changing climate is very tangible for us. It is directly affecting our cultures and identities and our human rights. Yesterday, the children's spokesperson of Greenland announced her concern of the people of Avanersuaq Inuit, who are only about 1,000. Here there's 208 children that are today, these months, at risk because their parents are losing their livelihoods, because the ice has not settled, and they therefore are not able to go hunting. So the children's spokesperson is calling for action to be sure to act and protect the rights of the child in the situation of climate change. Last night I was in contact with the Dog Sledding Association of Greenland, to which I'm the patron of the children's dog sled race. They are seeing severe consequences to their livelihoods because they cannot hunt because of climate change, and therefore cannot feed their dogs with the nutritious food that they would usually feed them with, and they have to buy food for the dogs in the store, affecting their everyday life and economies severely. So there's a very serious reason why we are gathered in this room today to discuss nature-based solutions and indigenous-led conservation. Because in the midst of all of these huge issues that affect us so directly, we also take part in finding solutions on how to protect our nature, to make sure that we always, for generations to come, will have access to live from the nature as we have done for time immemorial. So I look very much forward to welcoming all panelists. But first I will give the floor to Minister Lund, who is the Minister of the Government of Greenland for Agriculture, Self-Sufficiency, Energy and Environment. And I'm very happy that the Minister is able to be here with us today. Tikilluangaarit kalistat.
Kuinauisuaq taama pitsaatisun tikilluaqunaqarmaani tikilluaqunaqaratta. Thank you. It's nice to be here. Nice temperature, because I came from Greenland for 2 days ago, and the temperature is not so high, but higher than normal. So, Climate change is happening up to 4 times faster in the Arctic compared to the global average. The consequences of climate change in Greenland are severe. When discussing climate change, Greenland and the melting ice sheet are often brought up as one of the first topics. Focus is often on the melting ice sheet and subsequent global consequences. However, the people of the Arctic are often not mentioned, and very often we are not part of the discussions. It is important for me to state that climate change does not only have major and severe consequences on our environment. Our people are largely affected. Our livelihoods, ways of life, and culture are threatened by climate change. I have many examples of this. The hunters of Inuit-led in the northernmost part of Greenland are currently suffering from the lack of sea ice. Under normal conditions, the sea is covered in the ice from October, but in recent years, the ice has not come until December. With the sea ice comes seals and other animals, which are crucial for our hunters. Without the sea ice, our hunters are not able to go to hunting and provide their families. Other example is from the other end of Greenland, southern Greenland. In the beginning of November, sudden and massive snowfall combined with a massive storm. This is normally a time where the sheep are still out on the mountains grazing. The impact is the sheep herd were not able to look for the animals. A large rescue operation was put in place, and many sheep were saved after being completely covered in snow, but not all were this fortunate. At last example I want to illustrate are the possible consequences of melting permafrost on the bottom of the ocean. We have reason to fear that the melting permafrost will release large amounts of methane gas, which will have major consequences of life in the Greenlandic waters. As our country is a fishing nation, the potential consequences are massive. Knowledge about this threat is limited, and it is crucial to gain more knowledge about this subject. I will also focus on Pigelassorsuaq and however, today I will speak about my perspective of Inuit-led Arctic conservation action for establishing natural path solutions. I will focus on the Pigelassorsuaq and the letter of intent for this area which Greenland and Canada have signed a few months ago. With this letter of intent, we will increase our cooperation on the managing of Pigelassorsuaq. Pigelassorsuaq is a very unique sea area between northern Greenland and northern Nunavut in Canada. It contains one of the largest polynia in the Arctic. A polynia is a larger area with open seawater in an otherwise ice-covered sea. It remains ice-free in winter. The Pigelassorsuaq has great importance for wildlife throughout the Arctic. There has been a rich hunting culture for millennia. Therefore, the Pigelassorsuaq has great cultural significance. Pigelassorsuaq, like the rest of the Arctic, is affected by climate change. Climate change affects nature. It affects the ice and the sea currents, and it affects the behavior of animals. It creates challenges that now know national borders. Inuits in both Qaanaaq area of Greenland and in Nunavut of Canada observes the changes. Now, together with Canada, we have agreed to formulate common goals for the sustainable management and protection of nature and environment in the region. We have decided to establish a joint steering committee, which will form the framework for a close collaboration. The steering committee is expected to consist of representation from a country's respective national governments, local representatives, representation from Inuit organizations, and fishing and hunting organizations. We have decided to exchange our knowledge about Pikialasorsuaq. Among other things, we must use our indigenous knowledge, which has been accumulated by generations. In addition to the letter of intent, facilitates more collaboration on research and monitoring of the area. Part of the coming work is to identify and implement management measures. This may include nature-based solutions. When we talk about nature-based solutions in Greenland, a typical example is how our wetlands, our Ramsar areas, help store CO2. The areas are also varied and rich in biodiversity. In this way, they help mitigate both global warming and the biodiversity crisis. But this is not enough. Together we will look for more solutions and new solutions to address to changes that are happening to the Pikialasorsuaq right now. The initial thoughts for this collaboration started 10 years ago. A lot of work has been done already, not least by the Pikialasorsuaq Commission. The Pikialasorsuaq Commission's report was published in 2017 by ICC. One of the Commission's recommendations was that Canada and Greenland work together in Inuit-led management of the region. In Greenland, this is already ensured. Inuit makes up the majority population in Greenland. The administration authorities thus represent the Inuit in Greenland. This is the case for both Naalakkersuisut, which is the common of Greenland, and for the municipalities. In the coming work of the Pikialasorsuaq, Naalakkersuisut, the common of Greenland, will involve relevant authorities in Greenland, including municipalities, and ensure involvement of local representatives, representation from Inuit organizations and fishing and hunters organizations. Thank you. I have a little explain, because I understand I took a wrong paper to the beginning, therefore the beginning speak is a bit confused. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister Lund. I think that the two focus points complemented each other very much. So if you hadn't told us, we wouldn't know that you had taken the wrong paper. Now I'm very happy to invite our panelists, Martin Sommerkorn, our good colleague from WWF Arctic Program, and Victoria Bushman, who is the Environment and Climate Advisor at ICC Greenland, our chair's office in Nuuk, Rod Lang from the Nunavut government, and Louis Babis Chemnitz, who is also a youth delegate of the Inuit Circumpolar Council from Greenland as well. And we will take a question to each of the panelists before we open up for a more open dialogue. And we will start from the end here with Martin. What are nature-based solutions, and how do area-based conservation and protected and conserved area networks relate to them? This is a long question. And what, in your view, are opportunities in the context of the Arctic and climate change? Martin.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah, and thanks to the Minister Lund for a really remarkable introduction. I think that was a really great opening of this event. I'm very happy to be here. Yes, what are nature-based solutions? Not often is there full clarity on that, but simply put, they are an umbrella framework for using ecosystem-based approaches to address major societal challenges. And their main objective is to support the achievement of societal development goals and safeguard human well-being in ways that both reflect cultural and societal values and enhance the resilience of ecosystems, their capacity for renewal, and their continued ability to provide nature's contributions to people, which is also known as ecosystem services. There's a United Nations Environment Assembly definition that basically sounds like this: actions to protect, conserve, restore, sustainably use and manage natural or modified ecosystems which address social, economic and environmental challenges effectively and adaptively, very long here, while simultaneously, and that's the big part here, providing human well-being, ecosystem services, and resilience and biodiversity benefits. So it's a huge definition, but in a nutshell, addressing major societal challenges together with nature's support is at the center of nature-based solutions. And the actions include conservation, protection, restoration, sustainable use, and management of ecosystems, landscapes, and seascapes. So it's a wide definition. But I find it remarkable, actually, that nature-based solutions indicate a shift in attitude in our relationship to nature that maybe I would like to express as people and nature, as we acknowledge that we draw many benefits from nature and in turn must recognize the independent values of life forms and take action to support their integrity. So why do we discuss nature-based solutions and conservation actions together here at the COP? So policymakers now understand that the climate and biodiversity crisis are both so pressing and so intertwined that it is imperative to tackle them together. It is to a good deal because of this insight that the concept of nature-based solutions has taken hold remarkably quickly and is now widely recognized in international policy. So for example, the CBD's 2022 Global Biodiversity Framework has as target to minimize the impacts of climate change through nature-based solutions. The UNFCCC's cover decisions from COP26 and COP27 recognize the value of nature and the importance of protecting, conserving, and restoring nature and ecosystem to keep 1.5 within reach and for adaptation. And they encourage parties to consider nature-based solutions for their mitigation and adaptation actions. Multiple pledges have been made under champions and presidencies initiatives and also by non-state actors, including here at the COP28, and there are discussions now on enabling synergies between the nationally determined contributions, national adaptation plans, and the CBD's national biodiversity strategies and action plans, which are very important to grasp. So, but today's focus on conservation, how can area-based conservation establish nature-based solutions to people's climate challenges in the Arctic, which is what we're here to discuss. In the Arctic, people's lives and livelihoods are tightly linked to nature. Sarah has already stressed that, and Minister Lund has also stressed that. Climate change is written across all societal challenges in the regions, for example, food security, climate change adaptation, and social and economic development. Yet, we are not yet talking much about how we can address these challenges with nature-based solutions. Partly that is because the story goes very much to the global south with the nature-based solutions, and the other industrialized countries of the north of the Arctic don't pick this line up. But it is becoming increasingly obvious that networks of protected and conserved areas provide many nature-based solutions and are actually even often essential to their success. This is particularly true in the Arctic, one of the fastest changing places on this planet, as we have heard, 4 times the amount of the global average. A place where also industrialization and its pressures on nature and people's way of life follow on the heels of the rapidly receding ice and snow. In this situation, protected and conserved area networks support the integrity and resilience of the stage on which the relationships between all life forms and people are set. and where much of the region's ecosystems, nature's contributions to people, and human uses and cultures are and will remain to be based. So there are significant opportunities to establish, in this case, marine protected and conserved areas in the Arctic. The Arctic Council has agreed on a framework for such a pan-Arctic network. WWF has designed ArcNet, an Arctic Ocean network of priority places for conservation, as a blueprint for such a network, asking actors now to engage, to refine, to contribute, and to implement. At the International MPA Congress earlier this year, Inuit announced their ambition to create such a network across Inuit homeland. Arctic governments can work with people to establish conservation measures to deliver on their commitments to the CBD's Global Biodiversity Framework, especially Target 3 to protect and conserve 30% of the planet by 2030, and to their nationally determined contributions by establishing conservation measures that create nature-based solutions. At the moment, only 5% of the marine Arctic and 21% of the terrestrial Arctic are protected or conserved. It is important to note nature-based solutions are putting people in the center. And nature-based solutions are therefore determined by site-specific nature and culture and rely on knowledge, support, and very often leadership from people living in the area. In other words, there's no one-size-fits-all for nature-based solutions. They need to be tailored to particular situations. There are huge opportunities in putting people and solutions in the center of action, as the challenges in the Arctic are enormous, and we need to empower society and communities to take on a stewardship role that works for them. We have to use this opportunity to be innovative and support people building competence and capacity for nature-based solutions because of the rapid changes in nature that come with huge adaptation and resilience needs. It is therefore crucial that all nature-based solutions are people-centered, inclusive, transparent, and developed with respect to land rights and respect to local people's views, and the benefits should be equally distributed. Properly used with appropriate and implemented safeguards, they are also some of the best routes we have for providing a livable future for people and the planet. Thank you.
Brianna, Martin, thank you. And I will give the floor to Victoria Roduk-Bushman for your 5 minutes opening or introductory remarks.
Hello. Good afternoon. Yes, thank you for the introduction. I'm going to follow a little bit of what Martin has shared with us about sort of the definition of nature-based solutions and give a little bit more context for what that means for us as Inuit. So I myself am the Environment and Climate Advisor at ICC, specifically in the Greenland office, although I'm originally from Alaska. And in order to give you a little bit of context also for my response, I would like to share a little bit about who I am as a person. I happen to be the first Inuk doctor of conservation biology, though I know that I will not be the last, given the current circumstances we are in. I grew up in a small community in the north, and I come from a hunting family. And I am very aware, and have been from a very young age, that simple discussions so much as what can you put on your table today are related to the conservation decisions that have been made by governments all over the Arctic. So there have been many hunting and fishing moratoriums throughout my lifetime, depending on different circumstances within Alaska. And we see them now, even to this day, in other parts of our homelands, including in Canada and Greenland. So many Inuit across all of our homelands are experiencing very similar top-down approaches to conservation that are impacting our very daily life. But at the same time, I grew up with an understanding that the values that I heard about from conservation are actually our values as Inuit. We want to make sure that the animals are there forever, the plants are there forever, that we can continue to hunt and fish for as long as we are living in the Arctic, which will be hopefully forever. And so my understanding of what I wanted to do became, I want to understand why we can't work better together with conservation. We need to find a way forward in conservation for us as a people, because we are already doing that kind of sustainable management, regardless of what our governments are saying. And what I mean by that is that Inuit have been very engaged in something that has only very recently been termed conservation through use. So the ways that we engage in our livelihoods with a reciprocal relationship with nature has ensured that we are able to live sustainably. And this has been going on for thousands and thousands of years. And so we are starting to develop this idea that we are practicing conservation as a peoples, and we have been for a very long time. In fact, we even have some area-based things that would be described as area-based conservation approaches that are related to, well, we don't go to that area when the caribou are calving because that's not a very good place to be and we're disturbing their life cycle stage at a critical time. Those kinds of things have existed for us for always. So Inuit conservation, indigenous-led conservation, our perspectives are very much in line, I believe, with the ways that the Western world wants to do it, but it needs to be informed by how we see conservation moving forward. We have the same end goals. We want a lot of the same outcomes. But if we are not at the table to help determine what are the appropriate measures that we're going to put into place, what are the appropriate boundaries if we're going to create a protected area, if we're not engaged in those conversations, then conservation is not really serving the function that it is supposed to serve. And that is to protect in the best available, to protect in ways that are informed by the best available information. And we certainly, as Inuit, have a lot to contribute to that process. I had to also bring this because the question was very long. So we also wanted to look at opportunities and challenges. Minister Lund has talked a little bit about Pikialasorsuaq. Can give a little bit context for this also, that once Pikialasorsuaq moves forward, it will actually be designated as the first bilateral Inuit-led conservation area, the first bilateral indigenous-led conservation area in the Arctic, and we're actually quite certain it will be the first bilateral indigenous-led conservation area in the world. Of course, there are some bilateral conservation areas that span in indigenous homelands, but not any that have been created and devised and designed with us from the very beginning. So this is a very exciting time for us in conservation. We really want to push for our own messages, our own goals, our own approaches, and we really appreciate that the world is beginning to understand that this is also quite possibly the best way forward for all of us. So Koinokpak, thanks very much, and I really look forward to hearing from all of us more.
Brianna, Victoria? Yes, you reminded me I had forgotten to read out your question, but you have all received the questions. But for everyone to hear, I will read the question for Rod. Rod Lang from Nunavut Government. What is your experience in how to address Inuit priorities and create nature-based solutions through area-based conservation measures? And what, in your view, are the challenges and opportunities for conservation to succeed?
Thanks, Sarah. I'm going to build on what has been said already, but I work on behalf of the Inuit-led government, which is a self-governing Inuit territory within Canada that has a signed land claim agreement with the provincial government and the government of Canada. So within that, back in 2017, the Inuit-led government made the decision to develop a marine plan. It's called Inuit-led, which just means our oceans. And the marine plan is not just a protection plan, it's an entire holistic marine plan for the waters that are included in the Labrador Inuit Land Claim Agreement and adjacent to, so working out towards the economic exclusion zone. Within that, the very first thing we did is we went to our communities to ask the communities and ask the Labrador Inuit what they wanted the marine planning initiative to be based on. And it was very clear they wanted it based on Labrador Inuit knowledge and Labrador Inuit rights. So the next step we did is we actually went to the Canadian government and signed a statement of intent, which includes 8 points that lays out how we would work together to develop the Inuit Marine Plan. So within that, it recognizes the Labrador Inuit Land Claim Agreement and Section 35 of the Canadian Constitution, which protects Labrador Inuit rights. Also within that statement of intent is the Inuit-led government agreed to work towards Canada's protection goals and percentages, recognizing the importance of those on an international level. It also highlighted that the importance of Inuit knowledge and science and recognizing them as two separate knowledge systems and that they would be put on an equitable level in the development of the Marine Planning Initiative. The next thing we did through that actually is we went and did a knowledge study with knowledge holders of Labrador Inuit to document their use and knowledge of the area. And that was put together through the study, and then that was summarized through two separate science and knowledge research documents that put Inuit knowledge and scientific information together in the same document, summarizing the ecosystem, but recognizing that they were two different knowledge sources. So when we're talking about, say, the habitat of Arctic char, so a fish in the Arctic, the total area of the habitat of Arctic char would be the summary of the science and Inuit knowledge for that area. The Inuit knowledge is not being used to prove that scientific information is right. It's respecting those two knowledge systems separately. After that process, what we did is the Nunatsiavut Executive Council, so the equivalent of cabinet in state governments, made a decision to move forward on two protected areas. So there's an area of interest called the Turngat Area of Interest, and then there's a separate area called the Zone Area of Interest. These two areas span the entirety of the Nunatsiavut Coast. The area we're focusing on right now is the Turngat Area of Interest. So back in 2019, we announced the moving forward with the Turngat Area of Interest with Parks Canada, so the federal agency for the responsibility of protected areas in Canada. But the difference is the Nunatsiavut government wants it to be an Inuit protected area under the National Marine Conservation Areas Act, which has not been done before. So the idea is that it will be an Inuit protected area, but tied to a federal legislative mechanism right now. But long term, Inuit actually want their own legislation to identify their own Inuit protected areas. So right now, that is the mechanism that we're working to do. Also within this, something that the Nunatsiavut government has said is they want true co-management of this area. In all the protected areas in Canada right now, the federal minister has the final say. Even if there are co-management boards or structures, the federal minister has the ability to make that final decision. With this structure, the president of Nunatsiavut and the federal minister of Environment and Climate Change, also the same minister responsible for Parks Canada, would have co-decision-making authority, and they'd have to reach consensus to make decisions about that area. And so there is a whole governance structure that's been built around these protected areas. And so this protected area we're looking at moving forward, well, we are moving forward on, we're halfway through the feasibility assessment, is actually 16,791 square kilometers. So for those from Canada, that's 3 times the size of PEI. So it's a substantial area. It goes beyond the boundary of the Labrador-Inuit Land Claim Agreement. But we've also considered the economic impacts of this, which is really important because Labrador-Inuit have designated fishing licenses for the commercial fishery. And so any impact on a protected area on the commercial fishery matters for Nunatsiavut, for that economic side as well. So it's a balance of conservation and economics through the development of this area and the Marine Planning Initiative. And so I'll leave it there and wait for questions.
Rod. And the last speaker, before we go into a more dialogue-based panel session, is Louis Babis-Chemnitz, who is a youth delegate of the Inuit Circumpolar Council. And you, Louis, as a youth, what is your view on how we foster conversations on conservation among Inuit youth? And what is your vision for Arctic conservation in the future?
Hello. My name is Louis. I'm from Greenland, born and raised in Nuuk, the capital, and a student at Inuit-led Arctic, the University of Greenland. I think to your question, it's very important that youth are invited, and I'm very happy to be invited to the COP. It's my first COP that I'm at, and the first panel I'm speaking also, and I think this really builds up capacities in youth, which I think is so important that the youth are present to build their capacities. And I think that in order to understand really more about any topic, it's important to be there, to be present, and really to build that kind of an understanding. So it means that youth have to be invited to existing spaces, but I also think that spaces dedicated to youth only really engenders this sense of ownership in youth, and that they feel that they have a safe space where they're able to contribute, but also learn in the same time. I think youth should really be involved in these spaces because we talk about the future, which is the future of our lives, and also the next generation that the current youth are going to raise up. So we are directly talking about our lives. I think for the second part of the question on my vision for Arctic conservation in the future, I would like to say that I think it's important that the people on the lands themselves are first and foremost involved and engaged and leading. So that means that indigenous knowledge really sets the foundation, I think, but also in collaboration with other knowledge systems to get the best production. I think co-creation, co-production leads to greater understanding of the reality that we're all trying to seek. I would like to also bring up the equitable and ethical engagement by the Inuit-led Council, ICC, which is like a guide for engagement for those who wish to engage in the Inuit homelands. I will speak a little more about this. I think it's important to, in this regard, think about how nature lets us live, and in the same time we should let nature live. And I think that means living in harmony with nature, being part of it. And there's a quote from the Equitable and Ethical Engagement Protocols, the EEE, that I'd like to share, which says that our indigenous knowledge teaches us to pay close attention to the connections between everything that makes up the Arctic ecosystems. And I think this understanding that we have of the connections is really vital in tackling the climate change. So these EEE protocols really serves to be a guide for those who wish to engage in the Inuit lands. So I highly recommend that, and I feel like it's a requirement that one really engages and understands the people living in these lands when one wants to approach these lands. My understanding is that indigenous peoples have always lived in harmony with nature, which I think is a big answer to the climate change. And this understanding of living in harmony with nature goes back to this idea of everything being connected. And there's a very nice slide picture in the EEE protocols of the nature and it being like a big puzzle, and every part makes up the whole puzzle, and you can't remove one piece of the puzzle pieces. If you do that, it has ripple effects all over, and it doesn't show the whole picture when you take out that part. So it's really important to see the connections. And I think what we often see in Western science is that you zoom in on specific things without seeing the bigger picture. And I think that's a great contribution that indigenous knowledge can really bring, that we zoom out also and see the connections. So yeah, I think the Inuit knowledge really contributes in this way as an example. And I think it also leads us to the first protocol that says nothing about us without us, and that we should always engage with Inuit. And in that protocol, ICC refers to UNDRIP, the United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and says that UNDRIP affirms the Inuit right to engage in the governance of all things related to us and our lands, territories, and resources. And then just as the last thing I'd like to bring up is, I think it's important with funding from the international community. As we have heard that the Arctic is warming 4 times quicker than the global average. And it shouldn't be that the Arctic pays in resources alone for what is happening in the Arctic. Yeah, maybe I'll stop there. Thank you.
Renard, Louis, you said it was your first panel. You're doing excellent. So thank you. And let's give all a round of applause. So before we open up the floor, and I will let everyone know that we are live on YouTube and it's being archived. So everyone who wants to ask a question will know that you will be live and be archived if you speak. We will take a short round of comments on each for each of the panelists. And summing up, a few things that I heard from your presentations was, first of all, thinking about being in the same room with WWF as an Inuit organization, looking maybe 20, 30 years back, would not be as easy and easygoing and happy-faced as we see it today. And we are very happy from the Inuit Circumpolar Council that we are partnering with WWF with also grant agreements, as Louis was also calling for from the international community. And you're really living up to a lot of those requirements that we see are also necessary to engage in the Arctic. One thing that environmental NGOs and indigenous peoples have sort of been polarized on is the relationship with nature. And I think that the points on human beings being part of nature, being an integral part of nature, is something that Inuit leaders spoke about already in 1973 at the first Arctic Peoples Conference. And it has been a very stable point of view and very, very stable worldview that we have carried with us together with other indigenous peoples. So it would be interesting to hear about that journey seen from an environmental NGO on how we make sure that it is a human rights-based approach, recognizing that humans are an integral part of nature and what that does to our policy making. I also heard a little bit about how our jurisdictions are so different. So with colonization came the formation of states across our homeland. And as I mentioned in the beginning, we live across homelands in 4 different nation states. So when we engage in the Bikialasorsuaq collaboration with Canada from Greenland, it's 2 very, very different jurisdictions. So we have to navigate and find that way of doing an Inuit-led conservation between different jurisdictions. So that could be interesting to hear more about that. So it's actually also an expression of exercising our right of self-determination. And as I see it, actually also a kind of decolonization to reunite as Inuit across borders and lead our own conservation efforts and nature-based solutions. So I was waiting to see if somebody will raise their hand to comment on these issues and comment on each other's remarks. Anyone wants to go first? Yes, Martin. And in the meantime, I'll look out here to see if anyone has a comment, and I will write you down. Martin Daganna.
Yeah, I do a quick start because your initial remarks. Oh, sorry. I do a quick start because your initial remarks were very much about things that are at the heart of what we are discussing today. I hope that Victoria and others can also pitch in. I think actually 2 things need to be recognized that brought us here. A is the realization that the biodiversity crisis is a global crisis and that we can actually only address it if we work together. That in itself is a huge motivator for coming together, searching for solutions together, co-create knowledge together that brings us there, act together. And so I think there's just no other choice. We either think or we try this. And then we explore what it is actually that make us behave and come up with concepts, thinking, and policies in the past that may need to be amended. I always stress that there is not only movement on the side of the conservation organizations, there's also more awareness of people, how they can actually contribute and how they live conservation or how they are dependent on the solutions that nature provides. So I think there is movement from both sides that brought us here. And I would say that it is actually a very good place, the only place where we can be. And I don't want it to be forgotten that actually the conservation movement has a principle from the very start that has not been that obvious, and that's the ecosystem approach to management, or the ecosystem approach full stop. But it hasn't been really enacted in a way as it was supposed to be from the very start, which is how do we work together to manage our activities that affect nature? And how do we use nature to do that? So I think there's a lot of things that are going on in the background, and I'm glad we are here where we are today.
Well, Martin, other panelists wants to comment. We have 2 from the audience who want to ask questions. Victoria first, Daganna.
Thanks. No, this is something that I can talk about all day, so I'll try to be very succinct. Following Martin as well, I did just want to correct one thing that you said in the beginning, which was not incorrect, but there's more context to it. And that is that not all Inuit have agreed to a network of protected areas. It's only Inuit in Canada. And in Canada, we have a really unique situation where Canadian Inuit have been using conservation as a tool to assert their rights. And we have not seen this as much yet in Alaska and in Greenland. And there are other histories and colonial contexts behind why that hasn't happened yet. Also in Canada, speaking to somebody on legislation, there was a letter from the Indigenous peoples organizations in Canada to request Canada create legislation for Indigenous specific protected areas in Canada. And this is also something we do not have in Alaska and in Greenland. I keep leaving out Chukotka in Russia, not because I mean to, but because there's just not as much, of course, happening in this space right now. But we are also in need of new kinds of protected areas all across the Arctic because we do not have legislation for Indigenous protected and conserved areas like we do in Canada in some places, like we do in New Zealand, like we do in Australia. We don't have the legislation and the support to be able to create protected areas that protect our rights as peoples. And so we do need to continue to press our own governments to create the foundation so that we can have networks of protected areas, so that we can put into place these approaches that are very good, that we need to trial, that we simply have not had the chance to really put together yet. And we need a lot of support for that. And then I just wanted also to thank Louis because, you know, in my own talk, I didn't say anything about rights. I didn't say anything about ethical and equitable engagement. But for sure, this is like an incredibly important foundation for all conservation efforts in the Arctic. We can't do anything unless we're going to be engaged in a way that makes sense for Inuit, because these are our homelands that we're talking about. And I can share just really briefly that in 2019, when there was the establishment of the Talarityp-Emanga National Marine Conservation Area in Canada, this conservation area was established in part because Canada was trying to meet its goals under the 30 by 30 for the number of protected areas. And they got this legislation through, this proposal, this protected area was created from nothing in a little over a year. And it's that kind of drive to make sure that we are meeting our targets that is going to help push also our efforts as Inuit in creating new protected areas. I'll leave it there, thanks.
Buena, Victoria. Rod or Louis, do you have additional comments? Rod?
Yeah,
Sure.
just a two quick comments. I think when we're talking about protected areas, we need to remember that a lot of times they're referred to as like these pristine places that are just like these unique things in nature, but we need to remember that there's people that live there, and sometimes when you're talking about pristine areas, you're actually removing people from that situation. So related to the conversation here, that Inuit are part of that ecosystem, and taking that ecosystem-based approach is absolutely critical. Obviously, the percentages matter on an international level, but doing something just to hit a percentage is not going to be valuable if you're not representing the people that live within that region and that territory. And I think, obviously, the connectivity between protected areas is absolutely critical, which is happening within our planning. We're considering some of the other closures in protected areas because networks matter a lot in terms of marine protected areas in space. And then actually, I'm very happy Louis brought up just kind of the ethical side of doing this appropriately. That includes from research, that includes for engagement in regions. And what I will say for in Nunatsiavut is for the protected areas in Nunatsiavut, Nunatsiavut government went to Canada. Canada did not come to the Nunatsiavut government for these protected areas. So it's actually based on the priorities of the regions and those spaces.
Louis, do you have a comment? I'm just going to ask the technicians if you want us to hand a microphone to the two ladies who have questions first. I wrote green stripes. That's you.
Thank you for such an excellent panel. My name is Sarah Glasser. I'm with WWF US. I'm a fisheries ecologist based in our oceans program. And this question is for anyone. But the global climate models show that as ocean waters warm, fish will be moving more into the Arctic. And so I'm curious what this means for current negotiations, for current policy, and whether you see opportunity and challenges, one or the other. Thank you.
And we'll take the second question so we can take a round of closing remarks for the last minutes. And please keep the question in mind on fisheries. Lady in black, I wrote.
Thank you very much. Thank you for a really interesting and inspiring panel. My name is Natalie Seddon. I'm Professor of Biodiversity at the University of Oxford and Director of something called the Nature-Based Solutions Initiative. question for you, a couple of questions, and actually building on that excellent question is how is and to what extent is Inuit knowledge being used in designing adaptive management of these ecosystems? We know under climate change that the ecosystems are going to change dramatically no matter how much cooling we achieve. And, how is that going to be engaged with, and how is that knowledge about how best to manage the ecosystem under those conditions going to inform the management of them, of those ecosystems? And then linked deeply to that is, I'd like to hear a little bit more about, I'm really fascinated, I'm a natural scientist and an ecologist by training, but I'm fascinated by this whole piece about how we actually integrate indigenous wisdom with scientific knowledge, because it often seems that actually the indigenous wisdom is ahead of the science, but not always. And so there's something interesting in there, and I'd like to hear a bit more about that, because it sounds like you've done a lot of deep thinking on that. Thank you.
Yes, and we have a third and last question from the end. Daganna.
Koyanani. I'm an Inuvaluk from Tuktoyaktuk Northwest Territories by the shores of the Arctic Ocean, so I'm very familiar with what you speak of. I am the Senator for the Northwest Territories in Canada. The work that the Senate does has profound impacts on all Inuit in a space where we are highly underrepresented. As mentioned, rights and legislation are an integral piece of Arctic conservation and nature-based solutions. How does your organizations and groups work with federal parliamentarians to ensure that the legislation we study, consider, and subsequently pass does not harm, hinder, or profoundly impact the work that you do? And what can I do as a parliamentarian to ensure that the work that I do is cognizant of, informed, when we are looking at new legislation to ensure that it is supportive and reflects the needs of the Inuit, the lands, water, animals, and the ecosystem? I can attest that we continue to pass legislation that, in my opinion, is colonial and harmful to us as Inuit and Indigenous peoples. So I would appreciate anything you have to offer. Thank you.
Senator. Thank you and welcome, and thank you for being here. So we'll take around 2 minutes each for replying very big questions, but you're all very familiar, I think, with the things that were asked about. Anyone wants to go first? Martin Daganna.
Yeah, I can give it a quick start, also on the fisheries question. So 2 things I would like to mention. There is a prominent figure in IPCC Special Report on Oceans and Cryosphere that points to, and has been frequently used, that points to higher fishing potential in the Arctic. This is based on models that not even consider sea ice. So there is not really good knowledge about how these fishing potential might or may not emerge. But it is true that at large, there are new species, boreal species, coming to the Arctic, and that will affect fisheries. We don't know what the consequence of that will be and how sustainable such fishing will be. So in a nutshell, for the Central Arctic Ocean, there is a relatively new governance mechanism in place. The first international agreement that uses the precautionary approach and provides a 13 years moratorium on fishing in the Central Arctic Ocean. So this is a very good precedent, and how we can actually go about the uncertainties that come with resource extraction in the Arctic. It is, however, still a single sector approach, so it is not necessarily an ecosystem approach to management. So much has to develop there in that space in order to come to that solution. I would also like maybe to point then that Minister Lund could actually say maybe something about fisheries. I don't know if that's possible, because that would be very practical and quite interesting. There is, to answer your question, quite an effort now to look into how we can actually dynamically and adaptively manage area-based conservation measures. The first prerequisite is actually that we have a connected and representative network in place that we have to then actually continuously work on and update and establish the right measures for the conservation features that it targets, in order to actually keep step with the benefits of biodiversity conservation to provide to people.
Martin, we'll go on. Who would like to speak next? Should we just take down the row? Victoria Daganna.
Okay, I think I'd like to speak mostly to the indigenous knowledge and adaptive management questions. To my knowledge, Inuit knowledge is not used in any kind of consistent fashion, especially across all of our governments. There are some places in Canada, depending on where you are operating, that you are required to do an Inuit knowledge study anytime you try to do a change to management quota of certain species like beluga. We don't necessarily have that in all of our regions, but I would say that across all of our regions, the place where Inuit knowledge and Indigenous knowledge is most consistently input into considerations for policy is at the Arctic Council level. So through the work of the protection of the Arctic marine environments, through the protection of the conservation of Arctic flora and fauna, through the work of the Arctic AMAP, Marine Assessment, Arctic Monitoring and Assessment Program. These are the three major ones where we are having people sitting there and ensuring that our knowledge is a part of at least the recommendations that go through the policy level to how we could do better management of different resources or spaces. But I don't see that anytime soon being something that is consistently not seeing Inuit knowledge, Indigenous knowledge, consistently used by any of our governments. And part of that is the question about how then do we use Inuit knowledge? Where does it go after it's been collected? How long does it need to be in some kind of repository? Should it even be in a repository? So those kinds of questions also need to be answered before we can be sure that we are engaging in that way.
Goedendag, Victoria, and I can add that the Central Arctic Oceans Fisheries Agreement that Martin mentioned, the new framework and the new agreement between states includes Indigenous knowledge as an integral part of the collaboration, as a new thing for a regional treaty, actually stronger than the Arctic Council does. So we are really building on that and participating as Inuit through our state delegations in the COPs of the CAUFA, as we call it. So that's really a development to follow. Rod, Daganna?
Yeah, I think I'm going to work backwards. So I'm going to quickly comment on the Inuit or Indigenous knowledge component, is that all of my training in school is highly academic, and I was taught throughout school that I was the absolute expert in the field that I was doing in. So generally when I introduce myself, I call myself a recovering academic and a recovering public servant, because I used to work for the Canadian government as well. And I think the challenge is academically, you are taught you're an expert, you're taught you know best, and the federal government is making decisions from Ottawa and not in Inuit regions. So I think that's really important, is just like trying to get rid of those biases and things that are built into you, because Inuit knowledge is new to the Canadian government in terms of using it in academia, but it's not new to Inuit. That's the reality forever. So I think that's really important. Related to the fisheries and kind of how we're integrating climate change into what we're doing is, in these research summary documents we're doing, say for the Turngat Area of Interest, we have 63 different people, that's academics, that's federal government departments, as well as Inuit, working together on 15 chapters that go through the ecosystem. Each of those chapters are being co-wrote by using Inuit knowledge as well as science, so that we can summarize that in an equitable level as we go through that. One of those chapters is also actually archaeology, recognizing the history of Inuit in the area and the importance of that, including things like fisheries and other things. And then the last comment I would make is just for that adaptive management impact side, we actually have downscaled 6 models estimating the impacts to the marine environment till 2100 on multiple variables, including oxygen, ocean temperature, nutrients, chlorophyll, things that matter in terms of that. And that's being integrated into this research assessment document. But it's also being considered for the development of this protected area of what do these modeled numbers, both in the marine environment as well as the terrestrial environment, mean for things like sea ice, for the species that live there and for Inuit.
Well, now, Rod, and the last word will be for Louis to close off our event today. Daganna.
Thank you. For the first question on fish stocks moving around, I think it's important to look at this not only in terms of economics and seeing that now we have a new species coming up and we have an opportunity to fish, and I think that can often be the point of view when we see a lot of changes in climate change. And I think it's important to really remember how climate change is really teaching us that there are no borders. And one can easily do that if a fish stock gets to another place, then there's an overfishing, and then again not seeing that interconnectedness that it has on the rest of the environment. On the second question, I think there needs to be a better understanding on really how to connect Inuit and indigenous knowledge with Western science, and learning to see how they can really collaborate into bringing the best understanding of what's happening. And I think we do want to see collaboration, and we do want to collaborate, but it has to be an equal form of collaboration. I think I'll finish on that. Thank you.
I thank you all for being here and for spending an hour with us. We are on time ending, and I know there will be a lot of other events to run to. So, I'll see you around, and we'll see you around. To our panelists and Minister Lund.